A billionaire spots a little girl holding a baby in the rain, but what she says next is shocking. Thunder cracked across Clearwater's sky as 3 black SUVs tore through the rain-slicked streets. In the lead vehicle, Detective John Harris gripped the wheel, his knuckles white with tension. Beside him, Ethan Carter clutched a weathered leather briefcase to his chest, his face illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning. "They're gaining," Ethan shouted over the storm's fury, glancing at the rearview mirror where 2 unmarked vehicles pursued them relentlessly. The contents of the briefcase weighed heavily on both men's minds: hundreds of documents, photographs, and hard drives containing evidence of a child trafficking ring that reached the highest levels of Clearwater's elite. Evidence that could bring down Victoria Reed and her entire operation. A bullet shattered the rear window, sending glass spraying across the back seat. John swerved sharply, taking them down a narrow alley as rain hammered against the windshield. "If anything happens," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the chaos, "get this to Judge Marshall. She's the only one we can trust." The pursuit continued through the maze of downtown streets, past the shuttered storefronts and empty sidewalks. Another shot rang out, this time puncturing the rear tire. The SUV fishtailed violently, spinning across the wet pavement. Time seemed to slow as they careened toward a concrete barrier. In those precious seconds, Ethan's mind flashed to Lucy and Ryan, the 2 children who had started this entire journey, waiting safely at Helen's house. He thought of his own lost family, of redemption, of justice. The impact was devastating. Metal screamed against concrete as the SUV rolled, finally coming to rest on its side. Through the settling dust and rain, Ethan could make out approaching footsteps. He pushed the briefcase into John's hands, his voice barely a whisper. "Run! They can't get this." John hesitated for a moment, then disappeared into the darkness with the briefcase. As armed figures surrounded the wreckage, Ethan smiled faintly. The evidence was safe. The truth would come out. And somewhere in Clearwater, 2 children who had lost everything would finally find justice. But the last thing Ethan saw before unconsciousness claimed him was a familiar face peering through the broken window: Deputy Chief Thomas Weston, his expression a mask of cold triumph. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning. 7 years before the crash, Ethan Carter's life had been picture perfect. Living in a colonial-style house in Clearwater's affluent Highland district, he had built a successful construction company, married his college sweetheart Anna, and treasured every moment with their 6-year-old daughter Lily. The morning everything changed had started like any other pancakes shaped like animals, Lily's laughter filling the kitchen, Anna's gentle reminders about after-school ballet. "Daddy, you'll come to my recital tonight, right?" Lily had asked, her green eyes bright with hope as she adjusted her butterfly hair clip, a birthday gift from her mother. Ethan remembered promising he would be there, kissing her forehead before heading to a crucial meeting with investors. That promise would haunt him for years to come. The call came at 2:47 p.m. Anna's voice was trembling, barely audible. "Someone's trying to break in," then glass shattering. Lily's scream and silence. By the time Ethan reached home, their world had imploded. The front door hung off its hinges, furniture overturned, and most devastating, no sign of Anna or Lily. The following weeks became a blur of police interviews, search parties, and sleepless nights. Ethan emptied his bank accounts, hiring private investigators, plastered the city with missing person posters, and appeared on every news channel that would have him. But as days turned to weeks, hope began to fade. Detective Sarah Marshall, then a junior officer, had been the one to deliver the news. They'd found Anna and Lily's bodies in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. No signs of trafficking, no ransom demands, just a seemingly senseless act of violence that the police eventually filed away as a home invasion gone wrong. Ethan refused to accept their conclusion. He spent years investigating on his own, following leads that led nowhere, until grief and guilt consumed him entirely. He sold his company, withdrew from friends, and moved to a modest house on the opposite side of town where nobody knew his story. The only photo he kept was a small portrait of Lily at her 5th birthday party, tucked away in his desk drawer, a reminder of everything he had failed to protect. The wealthy businessman who once commanded boardrooms became a shadow, taking odd construction jobs and avoiding human connection. His only regular interaction was with Helen Miller, the owner of a small diner who seemed to understand his need for silence. She never asked about his past, just quietly ensured he ate something other than coffee and toast. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. A man who once built homes for others had lost his own family within the walls he'd created to keep them safe. The security system he'd installed, the reinforced doors, the emergency protocols, none of it had mattered in the end. The guilt of not being there, of prioritizing a business meeting over his family's safety, ate at him daily. Even in his self-imposed isolation, Ethan couldn't escape the whispers that followed him in Clearwater. Some pitied him, others blamed him, and a few even suspected him the grieving husband's alibi had seemed too convenient to some. But the truth was far simpler and more devastating. He was simply a man who had failed to protect the ones he loved most. This was the weight Ethan Carter carried the night he spotted 2 small figures huddled against a lamppost in the rain, a burden that would unexpectedly set him on a path to uncover truths far darker than he could have imagined, and perhaps finally find a way to make amends for his past. Victoria Reed's ascent to power began 15 years ago when Haven for Kids was still a beacon of hope in Clearwater. The orphanage had been founded by Margaret Holloway, a beloved philanthropist whose genuine love for children shaped the institution's early years. Under Margaret's leadership, Haven was known for its success stories, children finding loving homes, receiving quality education, and healing from past traumas. But beneath the surface, financial troubles were brewing. The economic downturn had hit charitable donations hard, and Margaret's declining health left her searching for a successor. Enter Victoria Reed, polished, articulate, and armed with impressive credentials that would later prove to be falsified. She arrived at Haven as a volunteer, quickly winning Margaret's trust with her seemingly endless dedication to the children. When Margaret passed away unexpectedly, her will named Victoria as Haven's new director. The transition appeared seamless at first. Victoria maintained the orphanage's pristine reputation while making what she called necessary modernizations. Staff who had worked there for decades were gradually replaced by new faces, people who owed their loyalty to Victoria rather than Haven's founding principles. The changes were subtle but significant. Security cameras appeared in every corner. Children's communication with the outside world became increasingly restricted. Adoption procedures grew more complex, requiring extensive paperwork that somehow always led to wealthy families being favored over others. Those who questioned these changes found themselves swiftly dismissed, their concerns buried under layers of bureaucratic silence. Victoria's genius lay in her ability to maintain 2 distinct images. To Clearwater's elite, she was the sophisticated savior of troubled children, hosting lavish fundraisers where she spoke passionately about child welfare. To those under her authority, she was a different creature, entirely cold, calculating, and brutally efficient in silencing dissent. Her network grew steadily. Judge William Parker, who oversaw adoption cases, became a regular at Haven's events. Police Chief Michael Reynolds directed generous city funding to Haven's security upgrades. Business leaders competed for seats on Haven's board, eager to associate themselves with what appeared to be Clearwater's most prestigious charity. But it was Deputy Chief Thomas Weston who became Victoria's most valuable eye. His position in law enforcement allowed him to bury any troubling reports about Haven, while his own network of corrupt officers ensured that any investigation would lead nowhere. In return, Victoria provided him with the one thing he craved most: power over others' fate. The missing children began as rumors, whispers among the staff about kids who vanished overnight, their records mysteriously lost or altered. When questions arose, Victoria had ready answers: successful adoptions, transfers to other facilities, reunions with newly found relatives. The paperwork always appeared impeccable, thanks to her careful orchestration. Her real masterpiece was the basement. While the upper floors of Haven maintained their cheerful facade, complete with colorful playrooms and well-kept dormitories, the underground facility served a darker purpose. Here, children disappeared into a network that reached far beyond Clearwater's borders, their identities erased and replaced with cargo numbers. Victoria's own past remained shadowy despite her public prominence. Those who dug too deeply into her history often found their careers or lives taking unfortunate turns. She claimed to be a widow of a wealthy businessman, but like much about Victoria Reed, this too was carefully constructed fiction. As Haven's reputation grew, so did Victoria's influence. She became untouchable, protected by the very people who should have been investigating her. The perfect facade she had built seemed impenetrable until the night Ethan Carter found 2 children in the rain, unknowingly setting in motion events that would expose the darkness lurking behind Haven's walls. John Harris carried the weight of 20 years in law enforcement in the lines of his face. A decorated detective with Clearwater Police Department's Major Crimes Unit, he was known for his unwavering integrity in a department increasingly compromised by corruption. His desk held only 2 personal items: a photograph of his late wife Sarah, who died of cancer 3 years ago, and his first badge, worn and tarnished but kept as a reminder of his oath to serve justice. Harris had watched Clearwater change over the decades, seen good cops turn blind eyes to corruption, witnessed judges trade favorable rulings for political favors. He kept detailed files on every suspicious case, every inexplicable dismissal, every connection that seemed too convenient. His colleagues called him paranoid. He called it being thorough. The walls of his small apartment were covered with investigation boards, each thread potentially leading to something bigger. Helen Miller's Diner sat on the corner of Maple and 4th, a modest establishment that served more than just food. To the lost souls of Clearwater, it was a sanctuary. Helen, in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair and knowing eyes, had an uncanny ability to read people's needs. She served coffee with a side of compassion, and her chocolate pie had a reputation for healing broken hearts. Behind Helen's grandmotherly demeanor lay a steel core forged by her own painful past. 20 years ago, she had lost her only daughter Jessica to the streets of Clearwater. The official report claimed runaway status, but Helen never believed it. She turned her grief into action, transforming her diner into a safe haven for those who needed help but couldn't trust official channels. Lucy, at 7 years old, carried herself with the weariness of someone far older. Her dark eyes held a watchfulness that spoke of lessons learned too young, of trust broken too many times. She had been at Haven for 3 years, ever since a fire claimed her parents' lives, or so the official records stated. In that time, she had become a surrogate mother to 2-year-old Ryan, protecting him with a fierceness that both touched and troubled those who witnessed it. Ryan's world revolved entirely around Lucy. Too young to remember anything before Haven, he knew only that his sister was his constant, his protector, his everything. His infectious laugh, rare but precious, had the power to crack even Lucy's careful composure. Despite their circumstances, he maintained the innocent joy that Lucy fought so hard to preserve. These 4 lives, each marked by loss and resilience, would become inexorably intertwined in the fight against Haven's darkness. John Harris, who saw in Ethan's quest a chance to finally expose the corruption he'd documented for years. Helen Miller, who recognized in Lucy's protective stance the same determination she'd seen in her own daughter. Lucy and Ryan, whose escape from Haven would spark a chain of events that would shake Clearwater to its core. Each carried their own wounds, their own reasons for joining the fight. Harris sought redemption for the cases he couldn't solve, the justice he failed to deliver. Helen saw a chance to prevent other children from sharing Jessica's fate. Lucy dared to hope for a future where she wouldn't have to be strong all the time, where Ryan could grow up without fear. Together they formed an unlikely family of broken people, each filling the gaps in others' lives. Their strength would be tested in the coming storm, their bonds either strengthened or shattered by the revelations that awaited them. The night that changed everything arrived with a storm that turned Clearwater's streets into rushing rivers. Ethan Carter sat behind the wheel of his black sedan, lost in the familiar fog of grief that always accompanied rain. 7 years hadn't dulled the memory of another stormy night, another drive he should have made sooner. Traffic lights reflected off the wet asphalt, casting red halos through the downpour. At the intersection of Pine and Murray, something caught his eye, a small figure pressed against a lamppost, barely visible through the curtain of rain. His foot hesitated over the gas pedal as the light turned green. The figure didn't move. Even through the rain-streaked windshield, he could make out the protective curve of small arms around something. No, someone. A memory flashed. Lily huddled in her closet during thunderstorms, clutching her favorite teddy bear. Before he could second-guess himself, Ethan pulled to the curb. Rain hammered his shoulders as he stepped out, soaking through his coat in seconds. As he approached, the figure resolved into a young girl, no more than 7, her dark hair plastered to her face. In her arms, she cradled a toddler, wrapped in what looked like a thin blanket. Both children were shivering violently. "Hey," Ethan called softly, crouching to their level. "Are you all right?" The girl's head snapped up, fear flashing across her face. She tightened her grip on the smaller child, taking a half-step backward. The streetlight illuminated dark circles under her eyes, cheeks hollow with exhaustion. "It's okay," Ethan said, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Ethan. What's yours?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by the storm's fury. Finally, barely audible above the rain, "Lucy." "Lucy," he repeated, offering a small smile. "And who's this?" She hesitated, studying his face with an intensity that reminded him painfully of Anna. "Ryan. He's my brother." Thunder cracked overhead, making Ryan whimper. Lucy immediately began whispering soothing words, rocking him gently. The gesture was so maternal, so practiced, that it made Ethan's heart ache. "Lucy, you're both soaked. Let me help. I can take you somewhere warm, get you some food." He gestured toward his car, its interior light offering a warm beacon against the darkness. No, her voice was stronger now, edged with defiance. "Miss Reed says we shouldn't trust strangers." The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. "Miss Reed? From Haven for Kids?" Lucy's expression shuttered instantly. She took another step back, but her heel caught on the curb. Ethan reached out instinctively to steady her, and in that moment of contact, he felt her entire body trembling. "Lucy, please," he said, rain running down his face. "Whatever happened, whatever you're running from, let me help. I promise you'll be safe." Something in his voice must have reached her because she looked up, really looked at him for the first time. Perhaps she saw in his eyes the same pain she carried, the same understanding of loss. Or maybe it was simply that Ryan had started coughing, a wet, worrying sound that seemed to make her decision for her. "You promise," she whispered, her voice small but steady. "You won't take us back." "I promise." The words carried the weight of redemption, though he didn't understand why yet. In the car, with the heater running full blast, Lucy kept Ryan pulled close to her chest. Ethan caught glimpses of them in the rearview mirror as he drove toward Helen's diner, the only place he could think of that would be open this late and safe enough for 2 frightened children. "When did you last eat?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Yesterday morning," Lucy answered after a pause. Before we left." Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "And how long were you out in the rain?" "Since afternoon. Miss Reed drove us to the edge of town. Said we were too much trouble. Said no one would want us anyway." The matter-of-fact way she delivered this information as if being abandoned in a storm was something children should expect, made Ethan's blood boil. But he kept his voice steady, remembering how his own anger had once scared Lily during a thunderstorm. "Well," he said, meeting her eyes in the mirror, "Miss Reed was wrong about that." The morning after finding Lucy and Ryan, Ethan sat in Helen's diner, watching the children sleep on a makeshift bed in the back office. Helen placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him, her expression grim as he recounted the night's events. "Victoria Reed," Helen murmured, her hands tightening around a dish towel. "That name's come up before. Children passing through here, looking scared, mentioning Haven. But they never stay long enough to tell their stories." Ethan pulled out his phone, searching for information about Haven for Kids. The website showed a pristine facility, smiling children, and glowing testimonials from adoptive parents. Victoria Reed's photo dominated the homepage, an elegant woman in her 50s, her smile practiced and perfect. "I need to know more," Ethan said, more to himself than Helen. "Something's not right about this place." His first call was to John Harris. The detective's gruff voice betrayed no surprise at the early hour. "Carter? Haven't heard from you in years." Ethan explained the situation, watching Lucy stir restlessly in her sleep. Harris's silence on the other end grew heavier with each detail. "Haven't been on my radar," Harris finally said, "but Reed's got connections. Every time I've tried to investigate, the cases get buried. Chief Reynolds himself shut down my last attempt." "I need access to their records," Ethan pressed. "Adoption histories, staff reports, anything." "Official channels are useless," Harris warned. "But I know someone, Jacob Simmons. Former employee, he's been trying to get someone to listen for years. Nobody believes him because Reed had him discredited." The meeting with Simmons took place in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The former Haven employee was a nervous man, constantly checking windows and speaking in hurried whispers. "It started small," Simmons explained, hands shaking as he chain-smoked. "Kids disappearing overnight. Records altered. When I asked questions, Reed said they were emergency adoptions, but the numbers didn't add up." He pulled out a worn notebook, pages filled with dates, names, and observations. "I started keeping track. In 3 years, 28 children vanished. No adoption records, no transfer papers, just gone." Ethan's stomach churned as he photographed the pages. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Simmons laughed bitterly. "I did. Deputy Chief Weston himself took my statement. Next day, I'm fired. Week later, I'm arrested on false charges. Message was clear: keep quiet or worse would follow." Back at Helen's, Ethan pored over Simmons's notes. Patterns emerged: children who asked too many questions disappeared first. Wealthy donors visited late at night. Large cash deposits followed mysterious private adoptions. Lucy appeared beside him, silent as a ghost. "Those are their names," she whispered, pointing to a list. "Tommy, Sarah, Michael. They all disappeared. Miss Reed said they found homes, but they never said goodbye." "Lucy," Ethan asked carefully, "did you see anything at Haven? Anything that scared you?" She hesitated, clutching the edge of her borrowed sweater. "The basement," she finally whispered. "They took kids there sometimes at night. We could hear crying, but in the morning, Miss Reed said we were imagining things." Harris arrived that afternoon with more disturbing news. "Reed's making moves," he said, spreading police reports across the diner counter. Filed missing persons reports on Lucy and Ryan. Claims they were kidnapped by a disturbed man matching Ethan's description. "She's trying to get them back," Helen realized, instinctively moving closer to the children. "We need proof," Ethan said, studying the reports. "Something concrete that ties Reed to these disappearances." "The basement," Lucy repeated, her voice stronger. "There's a room with filing cabinets. Miss Reed goes there every night." Harris nodded slowly. "Getting in won't be easy. Place is guarded, cameras everywhere." "But if those files exist," Ethan pressed, "they're our only shot at exposing this. As they planned, none of them noticed the black SUV parked across the street, its tinted windows concealing the photographer documenting their every move. The first pieces were in place, and the game was about to become deadly. The first warning came 3 days after Ethan found Lucy and Ryan. A manila envelope waited on his doorstep, unmarked except for his name in crisp black letters. Inside were photographs Ethan talking to Harris at the diner, Lucy and Ryan sleeping in Helen's back office, Simmons passing him the notebook. The message was clear: they were being watched. A handwritten note accompanied the photos. "Some matters are best left alone, Mr. Carter." For everyone's safety, the elegant script matched the signature on Haven's official documents. Victoria Reed herself had penned the warning. That evening, Helen's diner received an unexpected health inspection. The inspector, a thin man with cold eyes, seemed particularly interested in the back office where the children had been staying. Helen maintained her composure, but her hands shook as she served coffee to the remaining customers. "Just doing my job, Ma," the inspector said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Though I hear you've been housing minors without proper documentation. Shame if the authorities had to get involved." Harris arrived minutes after the inspector left. "They're escalating," he said, examining the health inspection notice. "Reed's showing us her reach. The inspector works for a private firm owned by Judge Parker's brother." The threats became more overt. Ethan's construction clients suddenly cancelled contracts. Anonymous calls flooded Helen's diner with fake reservations, disrupting her business. Even Harris found himself assigned to traffic duty, a clear demotion from major crimes. Lucy noticed the tension, her watchful eyes taking in the adults' worried conversations. One night she tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Miss Reed always finds a way to make people do what she wants." The breaking point came when Ryan developed a high fever. The first 2 pediatricians they called suddenly had no available appointments. The third agreed to see them but called Haven within hours of their visit. Only Helen's connection to a retired doctor saved them from a confrontation with child services. "But you need to understand what you're up against," Simmons warned during a clandestine meeting in a parking garage. "Reed's network isn't just about money, it's about power. These people, they own judges, cops, politicians. They can rewrite reality itself." As if proving his point, the next morning's newspaper carried a front-page story about Haven for Kids. The article praised Reed's dedication to children's welfare, while subtly mentioning concerns about a disturbed former businessman harassing the orphanage. Ethan's name wasn't mentioned, but his photo appeared in a grainy surveillance shot. Deputy Chief Weston made a personal visit to Helen's diner, ordering coffee with a side of intimidation. "Terrible thing," he commented loudly, "when people let past tragedies drive them to dangerous obsessions. Sometimes these troubled individuals need professional help." The message reached its crescendo with a late-night phone call to Ethan's cell. Mr. Carter Reed's voice was silk over steel. "I'm concerned about your recent activities. Perhaps we should discuss this like civilized people. Over dinner, perhaps. But why not tell me now?" Ethan pressed, recording the call as Harris had instructed. "About the children you abandoned, the ones who disappeared." "Accusations can be damaging," Reed replied smoothly, "to reputations, careers, lives. Consider carefully which path you choose. Lucy and Ryan deserve stability, don't they? Would be a shame if they had to return to state care." The threat to the children sparked something primal in Ethan. "You'll never touch them again," he growled. Reed's laugh was soft, almost musical. Bold words from a man who couldn't protect his own family. "Sleep well, Mr. Carter. Do give Lucy and Ryan my love." The line went dead, leaving Ethan shaking with rage and fear. Reed's reference to his family wasn't random, she was declaring war. And that night, as rain once again battered Clearwater, Ethan made his decision. He wouldn't back down, wouldn't let another child disappear into heaven's shadows. Whatever Reed's network threw at them, he would face it. For Lucy, for Ryan, for every child who had vanished without a trace. The game was changing, moving from warnings to open conflict. But this time, Ethan wasn't fighting alone. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Harris was reviewing missing persons files spanning the past decade when he noticed something. A case from 3 years ago, the presumed death of Emily and Daniel Richardson's only daughter in a house fire. The timing matched Lucy's arrival at Haven. "Look at this," Harris said, spreading photos across Helen's counter after closing hours. The images showed a smiling family at a charity gala: Daniel Richardson, real estate mogul, his wife Emily, and their 4-year-old daughter Charlotte. Lucy, watching from the corner while cradling a sleeping Ryan, froze when she saw the photos. "The file says Charlotte Richardson died in a fire," Harris continued, watching Lucy's reaction carefully. "But they never found a body, just like they never found records of Lucy's parents' deaths." Ethan studied the photo, then looked at Lucy. The resemblance was striking: the same delicate features, the same watchful dark eyes. "Lucy," he asked gently, "do you remember anything before Haven? About a fire?" Lucy's hands trembled as she clutched Ryan closer. "Sometimes I dream about flames and a woman screaming. Miss Reed said they were just nightmares." Helen touched Lucy's shoulder softly. "Sweetheart, do you remember someone calling you Charlotte?" The color drained from Lucy's face. "I'm not supposed to talk about that name," Miss Reed said. "She said if I ever mentioned it, bad things would happen. To Ryan, to anyone who helped us." The pieces began falling into place. The Richardsons had been investigating corporate corruption when the fire occurred. Daniel Richardson was found dead in his office 2 days later, an apparent suicide. Emily Richardson disappeared, declared mentally unstable after claiming her daughter was alive and her husband murdered. Reed didn't just take children, Ethan realized. She was eliminating threats. The Richardsons were getting too close to something. Harris nodded grimly. Emily Richardson's still alive, living under an assumed name in Seattle. She never stopped searching for Charlotte. "How do we know this isn't another of Reed's traps?" Helen asked, protectively moving closer to Lucy. "She could be using this to draw us out." "Because of this," Harris said, pulling out one final document, a DNA test comparison between Lucy and Emily Richardson's medical records. "I called in a favor at the lab. It's a match." Lucy's voice was barely a whisper. "I remember. A locket. With a butterfly. The lady, my mother, she always wore it." Ethan knelt beside her. "Lucy, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. But your mother, she's been looking for you. She never gave up." "What about Ryan?" Lucy's arms tightened around her brother. "He's all I have. I won't leave him." "Ryan stays with you," Ethan promised. "Whatever happens, you two stay together." The decision to contact Emily Richardson wasn't easy. They knew Reed would be watching. But the truth of Lucy's identity changed everything. It gave them leverage, a way to fight back through legal channels. But Emily Richardson's voice shook when Harris called her. "Charlotte. My Charlotte's alive." The raw hope in her words brought tears to Helen's eyes. But even this revelation came with new dangers. Within hours of Harris making the call, Reed's counterattack began. Child Services suddenly appeared, questioning Lucy and Ryan's living situation. Anonymous tips suggested Ethan was unstable, dangerous. "She's desperate," Harris observed. "Richardson's name carries weight. If this gets out, her whole operation could unravel." Lucy sat quietly through it all, her small face set in determination. That night she tugged Ethan aside. "I remember more now," she whispered. "About the fire. It wasn't an accident. There were men in suits. They took me while my house burned." The admission chilled Ethan to his core. Lucy wasn't just a discarded child, she was living proof of Reed's crimes. And now that she was remembering, she was more dangerous to Reed than ever. "We'll protect you," Ethan promised. "Both of you." But as he watched Lucy finally drift off to sleep, Ryan curled against her side. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. Somewhere in Seattle, Emily Richardson was booking a flight to Clearwater. And in her elegant office, Victoria Reed was undoubtedly planning her next move. The truth about Lucy's identity had lit a fuse. The only question was who would survive the explosion. The truth emerged on a quiet Sunday morning at Helen's diner. Detective Harris arrived early, clutching a worn manila folder, his face bearing the weight of a sleepless night. He waited until Helen had turned the sign to close before spreading photographs across the counter. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a newspaper clipping dated 3 years ago. The headline read, "Tragic Fire Claims Life of Richardson Heiress." The accompanying photo showed a beaming little girl with familiar dark eyes, standing between her parents at a charity gala. Ethan leaned closer, his coffee forgotten. "That's Charlotte Richardson Harris finished. Only daughter of Daniel and Emily Richardson. Supposedly died in a house fire, but they never found a body." But Lucy, who had been quietly coloring in the corner with Ryan, looked up sharply at the name. Her crayon stopped mid-stroke, her small body going completely still. "The Richardsons were prominent figures in Clearwater," Harris continued. "Daniel was investigating corporate fraud when the fire happened. 2 days later, he was found dead in his office, apparent suicide. Emily Richardson had a breakdown, claiming her daughter was alive and her husband was murdered. She disappeared shortly after." Helen moved closer to Lucy, noticing how the child's hands had begun to tremble. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "do you recognize anything in these pictures?" Lucy stared at the photos, her face pale. She clutched Ryan tighter, as though afraid someone might snatch him away. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "The necklace. The butterfly necklace." Harris pulled out another photo, a close-up of Emily Richardson wearing an ornate butterfly locket. "You remember this?" She used to let me hold it before bed." Lucy's voice trembled. "It played music. But Miss Reed said I was making up stories. Said I'd be punished if I talked about before." Ethan felt a cold fury building in his chest. Reed knew. She knew exactly who Lucy was. "There's more," Harris said, producing a DNA test report. "I had the lab compare Lucy's DNA with Emily Richardson's medical records. It's a match. Lucy is Charlotte Richardson." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Lucy wasn't just another abandoned child, she was living proof of something far darker. Her father's death, her mother's disappearance, the convenient fire that left no trace, it all pointed to an elaborate cover-up. "Miss Reed," Lucy said suddenly, her voice stronger. "She used to make phone calls late at night. I heard her once, talking about the Richardson problem being handled." Helen wrapped her arms around Lucy's shoulders. "You're safe now, sweetheart. No one's going to hurt you." But Ethan saw the bigger picture forming. The Richardsons were getting close to something. Close enough that someone ordered a hit disguised as a tragic accident, and Reed was part of it. "Emily Richardson's alive," Harris added, "living under an assumed name in Seattle. She never stopped searching for Charlotte." Lucy's grip on Ryan tightened. "What happens now?" "I won't leave Ryan. He's my brother." "No one's separating you," Ethan promised, though he knew the battle ahead would be complex. Emily Richardson had legal rights to her daughter, but Ryan's situation was less clear. That evening, as Lucy and Ryan slept upstairs in Helen's apartment, the adults grappled with their next move. Contacting Emily Richardson would expose Lucy's survival, potentially putting her in danger again. But keeping the truth hidden felt like perpetuating Reed's crimes. "We do this carefully," Harris decided. "Build an airtight case first. The Richardsons weren't just wealthy, they had influence. If we can prove Reed's involvement in the cover-up, she'll know we're coming," Helen warned. "The moment Emily Richardson appears in Clearwater, Reed will strike back." Ethan watched Lucy through the doorway, remembering another little girl he'd failed to protect. then we better be ready, because this time we're not letting them win. The revelation about Helen's past came unexpectedly, triggered by Lucy's nightmares. Late one night, Helen found the girl huddled in the diner's kitchen, tears streaming down her face. "I keep seeing the basement," Lucy whispered. The locked doors. The children crying. Something shifted in Helen's expression, a shadow of old pain crossing her weathered features. She sat beside Lucy, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know about those basements," she said softly. 20 years ago, I was in one." The next morning, Helen gathered Ethan and Harris in her office. Her usual warmth was replaced by a steely determination as she pulled out a battered journal from a locked drawer. "It's time you knew why I've been helping you," she began. "In 1994, I wasn't just a diner owner. I had a daughter, Jessica, 16 and beautiful. She disappeared one night after her shift at the local grocery store. The police called her a runaway, but I knew better. She'd been excited about college, had plans for the future." Helen's fingers traced the journal's worn cover. "I spent months searching, following every lead. That's when I first heard about the network people in power who traded children like commodities. Back then, it wasn't Haven. It wasn't Haven. It was called Sunrise Group Home, run by Margaret Holloway." "Margaret Holloway," Ethan interrupted. "Haven's founder." No, Helen's voice hardened. The real Margaret Holloway died in 1993. Someone else took her identity, a woman who later trained Victoria Reed. I discovered this too late to save Jessica, but not too late to document everything. The journal contained meticulous notes, dates, locations, vehicle descriptions, conversations overheard while Helen posed as a cleaning lady in wealthy homes. She'd mapped an entire underground network, all leading back to the fake Margaret Holloway. When I finally found where they'd taken Jessica, she was already gone, sold to someone overseas. I tried going to the authorities, but the police chief then was on their payroll. Instead of investigating, they came after me, planted drugs in my car, threatened to destroy my life. Harris studied the journal's pages with growing horror. These names, some of them are still in power today. Judge Parker, Chief Reynolds. The network never died, Helen confirmed. It just evolved. Reed learned from her predecessor, made the operation more sophisticated. But the basics haven't changed: find vulnerable children, make them disappear, sell them to the highest bidder. Lucy, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "The music box," she said quietly. "In the basement at Haven. It plays the same tune every night at 8. Helen's face went pale. A silver box with roses carved on the lid. Lucy nodded. "Miss Reed says it's to help the little ones sleep." "It was their signal," Helen whispered. "When the music played, it meant transactions were happening. They're still using the same system." The revelation changed everything. Helen wasn't just an ally, she was a witness, someone who had spent decades gathering evidence against the very network they were fighting. Her diner's reputation as a safe haven wasn't accidental. She'd designed it that way, creating a refuge she wished had existed for Jessica. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Ethan asked gently. Helen's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Because knowledge is dangerous. Every person who learned too much about the network ended up dead or discredited. I had to be sure you were ready for what we're facing." She turned to Lucy, her voice softening. "When I saw you that first night protecting Ryan, I saw Jessica. She used to look after the younger kids in our neighborhood the same way. I couldn't save her, but maybe, together, we can save you both." Harris began photographing the journal's pages. "This is the missing link we needed. Helen's documentation connects the old network to Haven. If we can prove Reed learned from the fake Holloway, we can expose the entire operation," Ethan finished. But Helen's expression remained grave. "Remember, these people have had decades to perfect their methods. They're not just criminals, they're architects of a system designed to make children disappear, and they'll do anything to protect it." Detective John Harris had spent 20 years on the force learning one crucial lesson: trust no one. So when Ethan Carter first approached him about Haven, Harris's instincts screamed warning. A wealthy man with a tragic past, suddenly interested in missing children? It felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. "I want every detail on Ethan Carter," Harris instructed his most trusted colleague, Detective Sarah Martinez. Background, finances, his movements since his family's death. Something doesn't add up. The initial investigation revealed patterns that only deepened Harris's suspicion. Carter had liquidated his assets 7 years ago, right after his family's murder. Large sums of money had moved through offshore accounts. But he'd maintained connections with construction companies that worked on Haven's renovations. "Look at the timing," Harris explained to Martinez, pointing to a timeline on his office wall. "Carter's family dies, he disappears for years, then suddenly resurfaces just as we're getting close to Haven. What if he's working for Reed?" The surveillance photos on Harris's desk told their own story: Carter meeting with known associates of Haven, late-night visits to locations connected to missing children cases, conversations with people who had lost family members to the network. It all seemed to paint a picture of a man deeply embedded in the trafficking operation. But then came the night that changed everything. Harris was working late, reviewing security footage from Haven, when he noticed something strange. In videos from 7 years ago, Victoria Reed appeared at Carter's house the day before his family was murdered. The timestamp matched Carter's alibi perfectly. He'd been at a business meeting she had arranged. She set him up, Harris realized, his coffee growing cold as he dug deeper. Reed orchestrated the whole thing. Carter's family wasn't randomly targeted, they were eliminated. A further investigation revealed more connections. Anna Carter, Ethan's wife, had been a child advocate lawyer working on cases involving Haven. Lily, their daughter, had mentioned seeing scary people at her school right before her death. When Harris confronted Ethan with this information at Helen's diner, he expected denials or excuses. Instead, Carter's face went ashen. "Anna was investigating Haven," he whispered. "All this time, I thought it was random." The raw pain in Carter's voice couldn't be faked. Harris had interviewed enough witnesses to know genuine grief when he saw it. "Why didn't you tell me about Reed visiting your house that day?" "Because I didn't know," Ethan replied, his hands shaking. "I was at that meeting for hours. By the time I got home, his voice broke. It was too late." Harris pulled out the surveillance photos he'd collected on Carter. "I thought you were part of it. The money transfers, the meetings, it all seemed to point to you being involved with Reed's operation." A bitter laugh escaped Ethan. "Those meetings? I was tracking down parents of missing children. The money? Legal funds for families trying to fight Haven in court. I couldn't save my family, but maybe I could help others." The realization hit Harris like a physical blow. He'd been investigating the wrong person while Reed continued her operation unimpeded. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I let my suspicion blind me to the truth." Ethan studied Harris for a long moment. "You were doing your job. After what happened to my family, I understand the need to question everything." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Harris shared his files on Haven, years of collected evidence that had been systematically buried by corrupt officials. Ethan revealed his network of contacts, families whose children had vanished into Haven's system. Together, they began piecing together a larger picture. Reed hadn't just created a trafficking operation, she'd built an entire system designed to silence anyone who got too close to the truth. Carter's family, Helen's daughter, Lucy's parents, they were all connected by their attempts to expose Haven. "We need each other," Harris admitted, watching Lucy and Ryan sleep peacefully in Helen's back room. "You have the resources and connections I can't access. I have the law enforcement experience to make the evidence stick." Ethan nodded, understanding the unspoken agreement. "Partners." "Partners," Harris confirmed, extending his hand. "Let's bring the whole damn system down." The task of building a case against Haven began in Helen's basement, converted into a makeshift command center. Maps covered the walls, red strings connecting photos, documents, and handwritten notes. Harris had brought in a secure computer system, isolated from any network that Reed might monitor. "We need 3 types of evidence," Harris explained, pinning up new photographs, financial records proving money laundering, documentation of false adoptions, and testimony from survivors. "Without all 3, Reed's lawyers will tear our case apart." Ethan focused on the financial angle, using his business contacts to trace Haven's money trail. The patterns were cleverly disguised donations routed through shell companies, construction contracts inflated to hide cash transfers, adoption fees that disappeared into offshore accounts. "Look at this," he called Harris over one evening, pointing to a spreadsheet. "Every month, exactly $50,000 moves through 6 different companies before landing in an account in the Cayman Islands. The companies all list the same board members, people who died years ago." Lucy proved an unexpected source of information. Her perfect memory recalled details about Haven's operations that others had missed. The blue file, she told them, drawing a detailed map of Haven's basement. "Miss Reed keeps them in a special cabinet. She thinks no one can see her typing the code, but I did. 74921. Helen's network of diner regulars became their eyes and ears. Truck drivers reported suspicious night deliveries at Haven. Hospital staff noted children admitted with questionable documentation. Teachers mentioned students who disappeared mid-semester. Working late one night, Harris discovered a pattern in Haven's adoption records. The timing, he said, spreading files across the table. Every successful adoption happened within 2 days of a large deposit into Haven's accounts. The amounts vary, but they're always from companies linked to wealthy donors. Ethan examined the records. These aren't adoption fees, they're purchase prices. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A janitor at Haven, motivated by the recent disappearance of his nephew, smuggled out a USB drive containing backup files. The data was encrypted, but Harris knew someone who could help. "My God," the tech specialist whispered, after breaking the encryption. "It's all here. Financial records, fake documentation, even videos of transactions. They documented everything." The evidence painted a horrifying picture. Haven wasn't just trafficking children, it was part of a sophisticated operation that included money laundering, document forgery, and systematic intimidation of witnesses. The organization had tentacles in law enforcement, the judicial system, and local government. "We need more," Harris insisted. "Physical evidence that can't be explained away, something that ties Reed directly to the crimes." Lucy mentioned the music box in Haven's basement, the one that played at 8 every night. Helen recognized it as the same signal used by the network 20 years ago. It's more than just music, she realized. It's their communication system. Ethan and Harris planned a covert operation to access Haven's basement. Using building plans obtained through Ethan's construction contacts, they identified a maintenance tunnel that connected to Haven's underground level. The risk was enormous. If caught, they'd lose everything: the evidence, their credibility, possibly their lives. But the alternative was letting more children disappear into Haven's shadows. One rainy night, while Reed attended a charity gala, they made their move. The tunnel was narrow and damp, decades of neglect evident in its crumbling walls. They moved silently, guided by Lucy's detailed map. In the basement's filing room, they found what they were looking for: the blue files Lucy had mentioned. The cabinet's lock yielded to her memorized code. Inside were detailed records of every transaction, every child sold, every official bribed. Most damning was Reed's personal ledger, documenting her correspondence with the fake Margaret Holloway. The evidence linked Haven directly to the trafficking network Helen had investigated 20 years ago. But as they photographed the documents, a sound froze them in place, the music box beginning its nightly melody. Footsteps approached the basement door. They barely escaped, clutching their evidence, as Reed's security team investigated the disturbance, but they had what they needed: proof that couldn't be denied or explained away. This is it, Harris said, reviewing the photographs in Helen's basement, enough to bring down not just Reed but the entire network. Ethan nodded, watching Lucy sleep peacefully upstairs with Ryan. Then let's end this. For every child they've taken, for every family they've destroyed. The evidence was organized, backed up, and distributed to trusted contacts. If anything happened to them, the truth would still come out. They were ready to move against Haven. But Reed had one final card to play, one that would test their resolve to its limits. While the investigation into Haven intensified, something equally important was happening in the quiet moments between discoveries. The walls Lucy had built around herself began to crack, letting in fragments of warmth and trust she'd forgotten could exist. It started with small things. One morning, Ethan noticed Lucy had left her bedroom door unlocked for the first time. That evening, she asked him to read Ryan a bedtime story, something she'd always insisted on doing herself. When he finished The Little Prince, she hesitated before saying softly, "My mum used to read that to me, before the fire." Their breakthrough came during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of Helen's diner. Ryan was terrified, his small body trembling despite Lucy's attempts to comfort him. Ethan found them huddled in the kitchen corner, Lucy whispering the same soothing words over and over. "Here," Ethan said, sitting beside them. "My daughter Lily used to be scared of storms too." He taught them his old trick, counting seconds between lightning and thunder to know how far away the storm was. Soon Ryan was eagerly counting with him, his fear forgotten in the game. That night Lucy asked about Lily for the first time. Ethan shared stories of tea parties and ballet recitals, of scraped knees and butterfly kisses. When his voice cracked, Lucy reached out and took his hand the first time she'd initiated physical contact. Sometimes, she whispered, "I dream about my mum's butterfly necklace, but when I wake up, I can't remember her face anymore." Helen watched their growing bond with quiet joy, offering support in her own way. She taught Lucy to bake, starting with simple cookies and graduating to more complex recipes. The kitchen became their sanctuary, where Lucy could let her guard down and just be a child again. "My Jessica loved baking too," Helen told Lucy one afternoon as they decorated cupcakes. "She always said food made with love tastes better." Ryan flourished under the constant attention. His nightmares became less frequent, replaced by the kind of carefree laughter that only children who feel completely safe can produce. He started calling Ethan Daddy one morning, causing Lucy's eyes to fill with tears, not of jealousy, but relief. The transformation in Lucy was more subtle but profound. She began sharing fragments of her past, each revelation a testament to her growing trust. She told them about the night of the fire, about hearing her mother screaming her real name, Charlotte, about how Reed had forced her to forget, threatening Ryan if she ever mentioned her true identity. Ethan found himself relearning how to be a father. He stocked the kitchen with Lucy's favorite cereals, learned to braid her hair the way she liked it, and never forgot to check under Ryan's bed for monsters. Each small act of care helped heal his own wounds. One evening, he overheard Lucy talking to Ryan before bedtime. "We're safe now," she whispered to her brother. "Ethan won't let anyone hurt us. He promises different than Miss Reed promised." The words struck Ethan deeply. Lucy had begun to understand the difference between real promises and manipulation. She was learning to trust again, despite everything Reed had done to break that capacity in her. Helen created a wall in the diner's back room where Lucy and Ryan could measure their height, marking their growth with dates and decorative stickers. It was a simple gesture that spoke volumes. They were here to stay, to grow, to build a future. During their makeshift family dinners, Lucy started sharing stories from school, her face animated as she described her friends and teachers. She brought home art projects, proudly displaying them on the refrigerator. Small acts of normalcy that had been denied to her at Haven. The most significant moment came after a particularly difficult day of gathering evidence. Ethan returned home exhausted, his mind heavy with the horrors they'd uncovered. He found Lucy waiting up for him, a cup of hot chocolate prepared just the way Helen had taught her. "You look sad," she said, pushing the cup toward him. "Like how I feel when I remember before. But you don't have to be sad alone anymore. We can be sad together." In that moment, Ethan realized they weren't just helping Lucy and Ryan heal, they were healing him too. The children had given him back something he thought he'd lost forever: the ability to love, to protect, to be a father again. That night, Lucy fell asleep holding his hand, her other arm protectively around Ryan. The trust in her peaceful expression was a victory greater than any evidence they'd gathered against Haven. The first sign that Reed was escalating her counterattack came on a quiet Tuesday morning. Helen arrived at her diner to find the windows smashed, the interior vandalized. Spray painted across the walls was a simple message: children should be with their real families. The threat's meaning was clear. Reed knew about Lucy's true identity as Charlotte Richardson, and she was prepared to use it. Detective Harris arrived quickly, documenting the damage while Ethan comforted a shaken Helen. "This is just the beginning," Harris warned, photographing the graffiti. "Reed's getting desperate. She knows we're close to exposing everything." He was right. The next day, Child Protective Services appeared at Ethan's door, armed with anonymous reports of neglect and abuse. The social worker, clearly uncomfortable with her task, hinted that the orders came from above. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder, "someone very powerful wants these children back in the system. Be careful." Lucy overheard the conversation and retreated it into herself, the old fear returning to her eyes. That night, Ethan found her preparing a backpack with food and clothes for Ryan. "We should leave," she whispered, "before they take us away." Ethan knelt beside her, gently unpacking the bag. "No more running, Lucy. We fight back together." The pressure intensified. Ethan's construction clients received threatening calls, forcing them to cancel contracts. Helen's suppliers suddenly refused deliveries, claiming health code violations. Even Harris faced internal investigations at work, his cases reassigned to other detectives. Reed's network showed its reach. The local newspaper ran a series of articles questioning Ethan's mental stability, citing his obsession with Haven after his family's tragedy. Bank accounts were frozen for suspicious activity. Security cameras appeared outside their homes, watching their every move. The most frightening incident came when Ryan developed a severe allergic reaction. At the emergency room, the first doctor who saw him suddenly transferred the case, looking scared. The second doctor found traces of peanut oil in Ryan's food, something Helen was always careful to avoid in her cooking. There in my kitchen, Helen realized, her hands shaking. They got into my kitchen somehow. Security was tightened. Harris installed cameras and alarms. Ethan hired private security, vetted through trusted contacts. But the psychological toll was mounting. Lucy stopped sleeping through the night, keeping vigil over Ryan. Helen jumped at every unexpected sound in her diner. Then came the photographs delivered in plain brown envelopes to each of them. Pictures of Lucy and Ryan playing in the park, Helen shopping for groceries, Ethan meeting with Harris. Each photo carried the same message: we're watching, always watching. The most disturbing development was the appearance of a black SUV outside Lucy's school. The driver, a woman in expensive sunglasses, simply sat and watched. When the principal confronted her, she produced credentials from Child Protective Services. She asked questions about me, Lucy told Ethan that evening. About whether I mentioned my real family. About whether I seemed happy here. Emily Richardson's impending arrival added another layer of complexity. Reed's people had already approached her, offering evidence that Ethan had kidnapped Charlotte. The custody battle would be vicious, played out in courts Reed partially controlled. Harris brought more troubling news. They're moving children out of Haven, he reported. clearing the evidence before we can act. And some of our witnesses are disappearing, taking sudden vacations or accepting jobs overseas. The pressure was designed to break them, to force a mistake. Reed's message was clear: back off, or watch everything you love be destroyed piece by piece. But each threat only strengthened their resolve. Ethan installed better security systems. Helen moved Lucy and Ryan into a secure room above the diner. Harris accelerated their timeline, knowing they were running out of time. "We need to move soon," Harris insisted during a late-night strategy session, "before Reed can destroy more evidence or hurt more children." Lucy, who had been listening from the stairs, spoke up unexpectedly. "The basement," she said. "There's going to be a big meeting. I heard Miss Reed talking about it before we left. Important people coming to see the merchandise." The word made them all flinch, but Lucy continued, her voice stronger. "It's how they do it, show the children to buyers. That's our chance." They knew she was right. The meeting would gather all the key players in one place, the perfect opportunity to expose everything. But it would also be incredibly dangerous. "We only get one shot at this," Ethan said, looking at each face in the room. "If we fail..." "We won't," Lucy interrupted, her small hand finding his. "Because we're not alone anymore. None of us are alone." The day Lucy disappeared began like any other. Ethan drove her and Ryan to school, watching until they safely entered the building. Helen had packed their lunches: peanut butter for Lucy, turkey for Ryan, each with a handwritten note inside. Everything seemed normal. The first sign of trouble came at 2:15 p.m. when Lucy didn't meet Ryan at their usual spot by the playground. Ryan stood alone, clutching his dinosaur backpack, until a teacher brought him to the office. The school called Ethan immediately. "She was here all morning," Lucy's teacher explained, visibly distressed. "But after lunch break, her seat was empty. We thought she might have gone to the nurse's office, but..." Ethan's heart stopped when he saw Lucy's backpack still hanging on her classroom hook. Her half-eaten lunch sat on her desk, Helen's note unfolded beside it. No signs of struggle, no indication of force. She had simply vanished. The school's security cameras told a chilling story. During lunch break, a woman in a business suit, the same one who had been watching the school, approached Lucy with an envelope. On camera, Lucy's face went pale as she read its contents. She followed the woman willingly, looking back only once at Ryan playing on the swings. She knew, Harris said, reviewing the footage. Reed knew exactly how to make Lucy cooperate. Threaten Ryan, and Lucy would do anything. The envelope was found in a trash can near the school. Inside was a photo of Ryan at the playground, taken that morning with a simple message: "Come quietly, or he's next." Within hours, a video arrived on Ethan's phone. Lucy sat in the sterile white room, looking small and afraid, but physically unharmed. Victoria Reed's voice came from off-camera, smooth as silk. "Mr. Carter, let's discuss terms. You have something I want, evidence that could be damaging to certain reputations. I have something you want, a little girl who should be with her real mother anyway. A simple exchange." Lucy's eyes met the camera. Despite her fear, she managed to blink rapidly. Morse code, something Ethan had taught her for emergencies. Basement. Tonight. Meeting. "You have until midnight," Reed continued. "Bring everything, all copies, all backups. Otherwise Charlotte Richardson will finally reunite with her mother in Seattle." The implications were clear. Once Lucy was out of the state, they'd never find her again. Helen took Ryan to a safe house protected by trusted officers from Harris's team. The boy was inconsolable, understanding only that his sister was gone. "Lucy always comes back," he kept saying. "She promised." Ethan and Harris gathered their team in Helen's diner. The evidence they'd collected was spread across tables: financial records, witness statements, photographs of Haven's secret operations. Everything needed to bring down Reed's network. "She'll kill Lucy even if we give her the evidence," Harris said quietly. "She can't risk leaving witnesses." "Then we don't play by her rules," Ethan replied, studying the building plans of Haven. "Lucy's telling us the trafficking meeting is still happening tonight. That's our real opportunity." The plan came together quickly. While Reed was focused on the evidence exchange, a second team would infiltrate Haven during the meeting. They had something Reed didn't expect: the complete blueprint of Haven's security system, provided by the same janitor who'd helped them before. "She'll have Lucy in the basement," Helen said, pointing to the building plans. "It's where they always keep the children before transport. The music box plays at 8. That's when they show the merchandise to buyers." Ethan's hands clenched at the word. The thought of Lucy being displayed like property made his blood boil. But they had to stay focused, stay calm. One wrong move, and they'd lose everything. As darkness fell, they set their plan in motion. Ethan prepared a fake set of evidence for the exchange, while Harris positioned his trusted officers around Haven. The real evidence was already safe, distributed to multiple federal agencies set to move on their signal. In the surveillance van, they watched Lucy through thermal imaging. She was being kept in a small room off the main basement area. Guards patrolled regularly, but there was a 3-minute gap in their rotation, a small window of opportunity. Lucy's smart Helen reassured Ethan, seeing his anguish. "She survived Reed before. She'll hold on until we get to her." The clock ticked toward 8. Somewhere in Haven's basement, a silver music box prepared to play its nightly melody, a sound that had haunted children's nightmares for decades. But tonight its tune would signal something different. Tonight it would mark the beginning of the end for Victoria Reed and her entire network. At precisely 7:45 p.m., Harris's team took their positions around Haven. The night sky was overcast, providing natural cover as they moved into place. Through thermal imaging, they could see multiple heat signatures in the basement, more than expected. The trafficking meeting was drawing a bigger crowd than usual. 15 minutes until the music box Harris whispered into his radio. Confirmed visual on at least 12 adults, and he paused, swallowing hard. 7 children in the basement level. Ethan approached Haven's front entrance with the decoy evidence briefcase, every step measured. 2 security guards frisked him thoroughly before escorting him inside. Victoria Reed waited in her office, elegant as ever in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the dim lighting. "Mr. Carter," she smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Right on time. I trust you brought everything." "Where's Lucy?" Ethan demanded, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "Charlotte is safe," Reed corrected smoothly. "She'll remain that way if you cooperate. The briefcase, please." As Reed's attention focused on the fake evidence, the real operation began. Harris's team accessed the maintenance tunnel, moving silently through the underground passage Lucy had helped them map. The thermal imaging showed the guards' positions, allowing them to avoid detection. At 7:55, the first group of buyers arrived for the meeting. Wealthy men and women in expensive clothes, being led to the basement by Reed's security team. Each one would be documented, their faces captured by hidden cameras Harris had planted days before. The music box began its haunting melody at exactly 8 o'clock. In Reed's office, Ethan watched her smile widen as she examined the fake documents. Below them, the basement doors opened, revealing the true horror of Haven's operation. Harris's team reached the electrical panel. On his signal, the basement plunged into darkness. In the chaos that followed, they moved swiftly. Flash bangs disoriented the guards while tactical teams breached from multiple entry points. Federal agents, Harris's voice boomed through the darkness. Everyone on the ground. The basement erupted into chaos. Buyers scrambled for exits that were already blocked. Guards reached for weapons but found themselves quickly overwhelmed. Through his earpiece, Ethan heard the operation unfolding as he kept Reed distracted upstairs. Lucy, sensing the moment, enacted her part of the plan. The self-defense moves Harris had taught her came into play as she escaped her distracted guard, unlocking doors for other children as she moved through the darkness she knew so well. In Reed's office, the power cut triggered backup generators. Reed's composed facade cracked as radio chatter revealed the raid below. She reached for her desk drawer, but Ethan was faster, knocking her hand away from the gun hidden there. "It's over, Victoria," he said, as Harris's agents burst into the office. The scene in the basement was devastating. 7 children, aged between 6 and 12, were found in holding cells. Documentation scattered by fleeing buyers revealed sale prices, transportation routes, and customer preferences. The evidence was irrefutable. Lucy emerged from the darkness, running straight into Ethan's arms. "I knew you'd come," she whispered, her small body trembling but her voice strong. "I left the signs like you taught me." Indeed, she had marked her path through Heaven's basement, leaving subtle clues that helped the raid team navigate efficiently. Her courage had helped save not just herself, but all the other children as well. The arrests took hours. Prominent community leaders, wealthy businessmen, corrupt officials all led away in handcuffs. Their carefully constructed masks of respectability crumbled under the harsh lights of justice. Victoria Reed stood in the middle of her crumbling empire, watched by armed agents as Harris catalogued the evidence. The music box played on, its melody now a requiem for her fallen network. "You don't understand what you've done," Reed hissed at Ethan. "This system exists because people wanted to exist. Cut off one head, 2 more will grow back." "Maybe," Ethan replied, holding Lucy closer, "but you won't be here to see it." As dawn broke over Clearwater, the full scope of the operation became clear. Dozens of children saved, hundreds of documents seized, a trafficking network that had operated for decades finally exposed. Lucy watched from the safety of Ethan's arms as Reed was led away. "Is it really over?" she asked softly. "This part is," Ethan assured her, "and we'll be ready if they try to start again." The raid on Haven marked the beginning of a larger investigation that would reach far beyond Clearwater. But for Lucy and the other children rescued that night, it marked something more important: the first day of their freedom. The aftermath of the Haven raid brought an unexpected storm. As Harris's team processed the scene, police cruisers began arriving not to assist, but to interfere. Deputy Chief Thomas Weston stepped out of the lead vehicle, his face a mask of bureaucratic concern. Detective Harris Weston called out, flanked by officers loyal to him, "This is an unauthorized operation. Stand down immediately." Harris stood his ground, badge displayed. "This is a federal investigation, Weston. Your jurisdiction ended the moment we found evidence of trafficking across state lines." Federal Weston's laugh was cold. "I see no federal agents, just a rogue detective and a grieving father disrupting a respected childcare facility." The standoff escalated as more corrupt officials arrived. Judge Parker emerged from his car, still in evening wear from the interrupted trafficking meeting. Police Chief Reynolds appeared, attempting to order Harris's team to surrender their evidence. "Think carefully about your next move," Reynolds warned Harris. "Careers end over mistakes like this. Families get hurt." But Harris had anticipated this. He clicked his radio twice, and unmarked vehicles emerged from the shadows. FBI agents in tactical gear surrounded the scene, their presence changing the dynamic instantly. Chief Reynolds, a federal agent, stepped forward. "Your department's involvement with Haven has been documented. Please surrender your weapon and badge." The color drained from Reynolds' face as he realized the trap. The FBI had been building their own case against Clearwater's corrupt officials for months, using Harris's evidence as a foundation. Weston tried to flee but found his path blocked. His loyal officers, seeing federal agents moving in, began stepping away from him. Self-preservation outweighed loyalty to a sinking ship. "You don't understand," Weston snarled at Harris. "This system keeps order. These children, they're better off with people who can provide for them properly. Better off, Ethan stepped forward, Lucy secure with Helen inside the FBI perimeter. Like my family was better off dead. Like Helen's daughter was better off vanishing. Judge Parker attempted to assert his authority one last time. I'll have this evidence suppressed. No court in my jurisdiction will. Your jurisdiction is over, the FBI agent interrupted. Along with your career, we have footage of you selecting children in that basement 10 minutes ago. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records seized from Haven implicated dozens of officials. Surveillance footage showed judges, police officers, and politicians actively participating in the trafficking operation. Lucy's testimony would prove crucial. She identified officials who had visited Haven, recounted conversations she'd overheard, and described the systematic abuse of power she'd witnessed. Her clear, unwavering voice carried more weight than all the bureaucratic denials. The arrest sent shockwaves through Clearwater's power structure. Officers turned on their superiors, offering evidence in exchange for leniency. Judges who had suppressed investigations suddenly found their rulings under scrutiny. Weston, cornered and desperate, made a final play. Carter, he called out. Your wife and daughter, it wasn't personal, just business. Reed needed to silence Anna's investigation. If you just stayed blind like everyone else. The confession, captured on multiple recordings, was the final nail in the coffin. Ethan's family hadn't died in a random home invasion. They'd been silenced by the very system meant to protect them. As federal agents led away the corrupt officials, Harris approached Ethan. We knew they'd come, he said quietly. Knew they'd try to shut us down. That's why we needed the FBI involved. How long? Ethan asked. How long have you been building this bigger case? Since the night you found Lucy, Harris admitted. I knew taking down Haven wasn't enough. We had to cut out all the rot, or it would just grow back. The cleanup took hours. Evidence was catalogued, suspects processed, children safely transported to genuine care facilities. Through it all, Lucy watched from Helen's diner across the street, her face pressed against the window. Will they come back? She asked when Ethan finally returned. Will other bad people try to take their place? Ethan knelt beside her, choosing his words carefully. Some might try, but now we know how to fight them. And we're not alone anymore. As dawn broke over Clearwater, the true scope of their victory became clear. Haven was just one head of the Hydra, but its fall had exposed the entire corrupt system. The power structure that had protected child traffickers for decades was crumbling. Helen served coffee to the FBI agents, her eyes bright with unshed tears. After 20 years, her daughter's disappearance would finally be investigated properly. Justice, so long delayed, was finally beginning. The corrupt officials' arrests made national news. Clearwater's dark secret was exposed, prompting investigations in other cities, other orphanages. The system that had seemed invincible was revealed to be vulnerable after all. Lucy watched the sunrise with Ethan, her small hand in his. What happens now? She asked. Now, Ethan replied, we build something better, something honest. The truth about Anna and Lily Carter's deaths emerged 3 days after the Haven raid, buried in files from Reed's private office. Harris found it while sorting through decades of documents, a thin red folder marked simply Carter Resolution. Ethan's hands trembled as he opened the file in Helen's empty diner. Inside were photographs of his family taken in the weeks before their deaths. Anna at the courthouse, Lily at school, both clearly under surveillance. But it was the meeting minutes that revealed everything. Subject: Anna Carter's investigation into Haven adoptions. The document began. Status: critical risk. Action required. The words blurred as Ethan read about his wife's discovery of irregularities in Haven's records, her quiet gathering of evidence against Reed's operation. Anna hadn't been just another lawyer handling adoptions. She'd been building a case, working with a network of other attorneys across the state. She'd discovered the pattern of disappeared children, traced the money through shell companies, even identified several corrupt judges. Most devastating was the transcript of a phone call between Reed and Deputy Chief Weston Anna Carter as proof. Her daughter's been talking too. Seems Lily saw something during a school visit to Haven. They both need to be handled. Make it look random. The details of that night emerged with horrible clarity. The hired killers hadn't just randomly chosen their house. They'd been watching, waiting for Ethan to leave for his business meeting. A meeting Reed had deliberately scheduled to ensure his absence. "I should have been there," Ethan whispered, papers scattering across the diner table. "She was trying to save children, and I was at a meeting about property development." Helen found him there hours later, still staring at the documents. "Anna was a hero," she said softly. "She died trying to expose the truth. Just like my Jessica disappeared trying to help other girls escape." The connection hit Ethan like a physical blow. Jessica Miller hadn't just vanished, she'd been silenced after helping 2 younger girls escape from the trafficking network. The same network Anna had been investigating. More connections emerged as they dug deeper. Anna's legal files, supposedly destroyed in the home invasion, had been secretly preserved by her paralegal. They revealed a sophisticated investigation that had identified Haven as the center of a trafficking operation spanning multiple states. Lily's involvement had been accidental but crucial. During Haven's school outreach program, she'd wandered into Reed's office and seen documents she shouldn't have. Being a child, she'd innocently mentioned it to her mother. "That's why Reed was so thorough," Harris said, reviewing the files. "She couldn't risk leaving any loose ends. Anna's evidence, Lily's testimony, it could have exposed everything 7 years ago." The final piece was a letter Anna had written to Ethan, never delivered. Found in Reed's personal safe, it detailed her investigation and her fears. "If anything happens to me," she'd written, "don't let them bury the truth. These children deserve justice." The revelation transformed Ethan's grief into something sharper, more focused. His wife and daughter hadn't been random victims, they'd been martyrs in the fight against Haven's evil. Their deaths were part of the same story that had brought Lucy and Ryan into his life. "Anna would be proud," Helen said, watching Ethan with Lucy later that evening. "You finished what she started. You protected children who needed help, just like she tried to do." But the knowledge came with a terrible burden. Every moment of happiness with Lucy and Ryan was now tinged with the awareness that his new family had been made possible by the destruction of his first. The very system he'd helped destroy had orchestrated the events that brought them together. Lucy, perceptive as always, sensed the change in him. "Is it about your family?" she asked that night. "The ones in the picture." When Ethan nodded, she took his hand. "Miss Reed told me once that losing people makes you weak. But she was wrong. It makes you understand better, makes you fight harder." Out of the mouth of babes came wisdom that cut through his guilt. Anna had died fighting to protect children like Lucy. In saving her, in loving her and Ryan, Ethan wasn't betraying his first family's memory, he was honoring it. The night everything changed began with a warning. Helen was closing the diner when she noticed a familiar face across the street, one of the men who had taken Jessica 20 years ago. He hadn't aged well, but she would never forget those cold eyes. Her first instinct was to call Harris, but before she could reach her phone, she saw them 3 black SUVs approaching from different directions. Through the diner's windows, she could make out Lucy and Ryan sleeping upstairs, unaware of the danger closing in. Helen had only moments to act. She activated the silent alarm Harris had installed, then deleted the security footage showing Lucy and Ryan entering the building earlier. When the men burst in, they found her calmly wiping down tables. "Where are they?" the leader demanded, his voice carrying the same cold authority she remembered from decades ago. "Gone," Helen replied steadily. "I helped them escape. Just like I helped those girls escape 20 years ago, the ones you killed my Jessica for." The truth hit like a thunderbolt. These weren't just Reed's men, they were part of the original network, The same ones who had taken Jessica. They'd resurfaced for revenge and to tie up loose ends. "Search the building," the leader ordered. "The children have to be here somewhere." "And Mrs. Miller," he smiled coldly, "this time you'll tell us everything you know." Helen knew she had to buy time. Every minute she kept them searching the diner was another minute for Harris's team to respond to the silent alarm. Every question she pretended to answer slowly was another moment Lucy and Ryan remained hidden in the secret room behind the kitchen, the room Jessica had once used to hide other girls. "You really don't understand what you're up against," Helen said, her voice carrying clear through the diner. It was the phrase Harris had told Lucy to listen for the signal to use the tunnel that led to the safe house 3 blocks away. The questioning turned brutal. Helen endured it with the strength of a mother protecting her children, not just Lucy and Ryan, but all the children these men had ever harmed. She fed them false information, sending search teams in wrong directions. When they discovered the hidden room empty, their fury peaked. "Where did you send them?" they demanded. Helen just smiled, thinking of Jessica's last words to her: sometimes being brave means being scared but doing the right thing anyway. The sound of approaching sirens finally broke the tension. The men realized they'd been delayed too long. In their frustration, they decided to send a message. The leader raised his gun. Harris's team arrived to find the diner in flames, Helen inside. They managed to get her out, but the damage was severe. In the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness, she insisted on seeing Lucy and Ryan first. "My brave girl," she whispered when Lucy rushed to her bedside. "Just like Jessica, you both knew how to protect others." "Don't leave," Lucy pleaded, holding Helen's hand. "We need you. Who's going to teach me to make chocolate pie?" Helen smiled weakly. "The recipe, it's in the blue notebook, behind the cookie jar. But the secret ingredient is love. Always love." Ryan climbed onto the bed, his small face confused by all the machines. "Get better, Grandma Helen," he said, using the title she'd treasured hearing. "I did what Jessica would have wanted," Helen told Ethan later, her voice growing weaker. "I protected them, like I couldn't protect her." The doctors worked through the night, but the damage was too extensive. Helen Miller, who had spent decades creating a safe haven for lost children, had made her final sacrifice protecting 2 more. Her last words were for Lucy: "Remember, sweetheart, sometimes the bravest thing is to keep loving, even when it hurts." Lucy wore Helen's apron at the funeral, standing straight and tall, despite her tears. The diner's blue notebook clutched in her hands, a promise to carry on Helen's legacy of creating sanctuary for those who needed it most. In the weeks following Helen's death, the case against Heaven's network began to unravel. Key witnesses disappeared or recanted their testimonies. Evidence stored in the police lockup was mysteriously destroyed in a plumbing accident. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Victoria Reed sat in her jail cell, her confident smile suggesting she knew something they didn't. When Harris arrived to question her, she merely said, "Did you really think it would be that easy? Systems protect themselves, detective." The first major blow came when Judge Marshall, their only ally in the judiciary, was found dead in her home. The official ruling was natural causes, but the timing was too convenient. She had been scheduled to sign crucial warrants the next day. "We're losing control," Harris admitted during a late-night meeting with Ethan. "Someone higher up is pulling strings we can't even see. The FBI investigation is being shut down, classified as internally resolved." The media narrative shifted subtly but significantly. Stories began appearing about Heaven's vital community service. Opinion pieces questioned the credibility of child witnesses. Ethan's mental stability was publicly doubted, his grief portrayed as obsession. Lucy watched the news with growing fear. "They're making it all disappear," she whispered to Ethan, "just like the other children at Haven. Like they never existed." The final blow came when the federal prosecutor announced they were dropping charges against most of the arrested officials. Insufficient evidence was the official explanation. One by one, Reed's conspirators were released, returning to their positions of power. Deputy Chief Weston was reinstated with a public apology. His first act was to launch an internal investigation into Harris's unauthorized operation. Harris found himself suspended, his career in shambles. Even the children rescued from Heaven's basement were affected. Child services, still infiltrated by Reed's allies, began moving them to approved facilities in other states. The same pattern was starting again. We had everything. Ethan raged, pacing Helen's empty diner. Evidence, witnesses, confessions. How can they just make it all disappear? Lucy, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. It's like Miss Reed used to say, people only see what they want to see. They don't want to see the bad things. The defeat felt total. Reed would likely be released on a technicality. The trafficking network, though disrupted, was already rebuilding under new management. The system had protected itself, just as Reed had predicted. Emily Richardson's custody petition for Lucy gained sudden momentum, backed by judges they had thought were allies. The same courts that had ignored her claims about Daniel's murder now fast-tracked her right to reclaim Charlotte. They're using the law against us, Harris realized. Everything we did to protect the children, they're turning it into a weapon. Ryan began having nightmares again, waking up crying for Helen. Lucy spent her nights sitting by his bed, singing the lullabies Helen had taught her, trying to be strong even as their world crumbled. The diner, their sanctuary, remained closed. The insurance company, pressured by unseen forces, denied the claim for fire damage. The building that had sheltered so many would likely be demolished, erasing another piece of evidence. Ethan found Lucy one evening in the diner's ruined kitchen, methodically going through Helen's recipe cards. "We can't let them win," she said, her young voice fierce. "Helen didn't die for nothing. My dad didn't die for nothing." But the system's victory seemed complete. Reed's network had transformed defeat into triumph, using the very institutions meant to protect children as tools to continue their exploitation. The message was clear: power protects power. Justice, when it threatened the established order, would be quietly but firmly suppressed. In their darkest hour, Lucy made a simple observation that would change everything. Looking at Helen's cherished blue notebook, she said, "Maybe we're fighting them wrong." Helen didn't fight with guns or laws. She fought with love and truth. Maybe that's what they really can't stop. Her words sparked an idea, one last desperate plan. If the system could bury evidence and silence witnesses, perhaps the answer wasn't to fight within the system at all. Sometimes, Lucy had learned from Helen, the bravest thing was to change the rules of the game entirely. The confession came during the darkest hour, when all hope seemed lost. Ethan was sitting alone in his car outside the jail, watching the building where Reed would soon be released. A guard approached, passing him a note. "She wants to talk. Only to you." In the prison's interview room, Victoria Reed looked different. Her designer suits were replaced by prison orange, her perfectly maintained appearance showing cracks, but her eyes still held that calculating intelligence. "You think you know everything," she began, her voice hoarse. "You think I'm the monster. But I was just like you once, trying to fight something I didn't understand." Ethan remained silent, watching her carefully. Reed's composure cracked further as she continued. 25 years ago, I was an investigative journalist. I discovered the network, children disappearing, money changing hands, powerful people involved. I gathered evidence, wrote my expose. Then they showed me what real power looks like." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing an old scar. "They took my son, said I could either join them or watch him disappear forever. I chose to save him, wouldn't you?" "Where is he now?" Ethan asked quietly. "Safe. Far away. As long as I play my part, he stays alive. That's how they control everyone, find what they love, then use it against them." Reed pulled out a hidden envelope, sliding it across the table. The network isn't just in Clearwater, it's global. Politicians, business leaders, royalty, all connected by shared secrets. Haven was just one small piece. Inside the envelope were names, people so powerful they seemed untouchable, each connected to a series of numbered accounts, property holdings, shell companies. "Why tell me this now?" Ethan demanded. "Because they're going to kill me anyway," Reed replied simply. "My usefulness ended the moment Haven was exposed, but first they'll make me watch them destroy everything and everyone I tried to protect, including my son." Her hands trembled as she produced another document. "This proves my son exists, his real identity, where they're keeping him. I've spent 25 years being a monster to keep him safe. Now I need you to save him, like you saved Lucy." Ethan studied the woman before him, not the confident manipulator he'd known, but a broken mother who'd made terrible choices for what she believed was the right reason. "The music box," he said suddenly. "The one in Heaven's basement. It belonged to your son." Reed's mask cracked completely. "His birthday present. The last thing I gave him before they took him. They made me use it as a signal for their transactions, their way of reminding me who really held the power." "The network," Ethan pressed. "Who controls it?" "They call themselves the board. 12 people who think they're above law, above morality. Haven wasn't their only operation, just their most profitable in this region." She leaned forward, her voice urgent. "You want justice? Stop fighting the branches. Cut off the head. But understand, if you go after them, they'll make Haven look like a charity operation." As guards approached to end the visit, Reed made one final plea. "My son's name is Thomas. He's in Seattle, living under the name Michael Wright. Save him, and I'll tell you everything. Every operation, every name, every crime." Ethan left the prison with the envelope heavy in his pocket, understanding that the real battle was just beginning. Reed wasn't just a villain, she was a cautionary tale of how power corrupts by forcing impossible choices. The breakthrough came from Helen's blue notebook, not the recipe pages Lucy had been reading, but hidden notes meticulously written in the margins. For 20 years, Helen had documented every suspicious visitor to her diner, every whispered conversation, every child who seemed afraid. Harris spread the decoded notes across Ethan's kitchen table. "Look at these dates," he pointed. Every time a child disappeared from Haven, Helen recorded unusual activity at specific locations across the city. The pattern emerged like a spiderweb. Warehouses, private airfields, luxury homes, all connected by the movement of black SUVs and children who vanished. Helen hadn't just been running a diner, she'd been mapping the network's infrastructure. Here, Lucy pointed to a familiar address. "This is where Miss Reed took the special visitors, the ones who came at night." The address belonged to a prestigious private club, its membership list reading like a who's who of Clearwater's elite. But Helen's notes revealed its true purpose: a place where deals were made, where children were displayed like merchandise to wealthy buyers. Ethan's construction background proved crucial. These buildings, they're all connected by old maintenance tunnels. The same system we used to access Heaven's basement. They built their trafficking route through the city's underground. The evidence mounted. Financial records from Reed's envelope matched deposits noted in Helen's margins. Names of club visitors corresponded with Heaven's special adoption files. Every piece connected, forming a picture larger and darker than they'd imagined. Most damning were the photographs Helen had secretly taken through her diner windows. Years of surveillance captured in grainy images familiar faces in compromising situations, vehicles with diplomatic plates, children being escorted between buildings. Helen knew, Harris realized. She knew everything. The diner's location wasn't random, it was a perfect observation post. Lucy, who had been quietly studying the photographs, suddenly gasped. "That's the music box." She pointed to an image of a man carrying a familiar silver object, before Miss Reed had it. "And look who's with him." The photo showed a younger Reed, clearly distressed, watching the man. The date stamp matched her story about her son's abduction. Deeper in Helen's notes, they found references to the board, 12 individuals who controlled not just Haven, but similar operations worldwide. Helen had identified 3 of them through their visits to the club. "This is why they killed her," Ethan said softly. "Not just to get to Lucy and Ryan. Helen had enough evidence to expose everyone." The final piece came from an unexpected source, Ryan. Playing with Helen's old Polaroid camera, he'd accidentally photographed a meeting in the diner's back room. The image showed a document left carelessly visible, a ledger page listing the board's complete membership. Helen died protecting more than just Lucy and Ryan, Harris concluded. She died protecting this evidence. She knew someday someone would need it. They worked through the night, connecting Helen's notes with Reed's documents and their own investigation. The pattern was undeniable, a vast criminal enterprise hidden behind charitable foundations, political power, and social respectability. Lucy watched them work, her small face serious. Helen used to say that truth is like water, she remembered. It finds all the cracks and eventually gets out. The evidence was now complete, threatening to burst through every crack in the network's careful facade. Helen's years of patient observation, combined with Reed's insider knowledge, had created an undeniable case. The question was no longer whether they could prove the network's existence, but whether any system of justice would dare to act against such powerful figures. The identities of the board's 12 members emerged from a combination of Helen's notes, Reed's documents, and Lucy's perfect memory. Each revelation was more shocking than the last, exposing power at its most corrupt. At the top sat Charles Wellington, a philanthropist whose charitable foundation funded orphanages worldwide. His reputation for child welfare work had earned him humanitarian awards, while his network systematically exploited the very children he claimed to protect. "I remember him," Lucy whispered, looking at his photograph. "He visited Haven twice. Miss Reed made us all wear special clothes and stand in lines. She called it inventory review." Senator Elizabeth Morrison, chair of the Child Welfare Committee, was revealed as the board's political enforcer. She had buried investigations, redirected funding, and ensured government contracts went to board-controlled facilities. James Chen, CEO of Global Futures Investment, managed the network's finances. His legitimate business empire provided cover for moving millions through shell companies and offshore accounts. Every transaction Helen had noted in her diner matched deposits in Chen's hidden ledgers. The European connection came through Countess Marie Dubois, whose ancient family name opened doors and silenced questions. Her charitable galas were actually auctions, where wealthy clients bid on children under the guise of sponsorship programs. "Look at these dates," Harris pointed to Helen's notes. "Every time the Countess visited Clearwater, children disappeared from Haven. Always the ones Reed called special cases." Dr. Richard Spencer, head of several prestigious hospitals, provided medical documentation to support false identities. His clinics served as temporary holding facilities, where children were kept sedated during transport. The hospital, Lucy remembered suddenly. "Before Haven, they took us to a hospital. Dr. Spencer checked which ones were healthy enough for placement. Federal Judge Marcus Thompson ensured legal protection, issuing sealed orders that authorized transport of minors across state lines. His signature appeared on hundreds of falsified documents, each representing a child lost to the network. Police Commissioner David Roberts coordinated law enforcement cooperation across multiple jurisdictions. His position explained how the network had operated so long without detection. That's why no one investigated Jessica's disappearance, Ethan realized. Roberts buried any case that might expose the network. The remaining board members included a media mogul who controlled the network's public image, a technology executive who managed their secure communications, and 2 former intelligence operatives who handled problem-solving. Most disturbing was William Harrison, director of the International Child Protection Agency. His position gave the network access to vulnerable children worldwide, all under the guise of humanitarian aid. They built a perfect system, Harris said grimly. Every angle covered, every weakness protected, every threat anticipated. But their very perfection proved their weakness. The board's members had grown arrogant, keeping records of their activities as trophies of their untouchable status. Now those records would be their undoing. Lucy studied the faces on the evidence board, her expression far too old for her years. They thought no one would believe us, she said softly. Because they're important, and we're just kids. The final piece fell into place when they discovered the board's annual meeting schedule in Reed's files. In 3 days, all 12 members would gather at Wellington's private estate to review operations and select new inventory. One chance, Harris said, looking at the gathered evidence. We hit them all at once, or we lose everything. The stakes were clear. These weren't just criminals, they were pillars of society protected by wealth, power, and public reputation. Taking them down would shake the foundations of multiple institutions. But looking at Lucy and Ryan, at Helen's carefully preserved evidence, at the photos of countless children lost to the network's greed, they knew there was no other choice. The real monsters had finally shown their faces. Now it was time to bring them into the light. Wellington's estate sprawled across 50 acres of manicured grounds, its security as immaculate as its gardens. The board gathered in the mansion's wood-paneled conference room, 12 seats arranged around an antique table, each member radiating untouchable confidence. Our haven situation is contained, Wellington announced, his cultured voice carrying authority. MS Reed's unfortunate lapse has been addressed. Operations will resume under new management. None of them noticed the small red lights blinking beneath their chairs' transmission devices Lucy had helped Harris's team plant days earlier. Every word was being recorded, every admission captured. The Carter problem remains, Senator Morrison interjected. He's becoming inconvenient, like his wife was. That matter is being handled, Commissioner Roberts assured. An unfortunate accident is being arranged. The double doors burst open. Federal agents flooded the room, led by Harris and backed by international law enforcement. The board members' faces shifted from shock to outrage to fear as they realized their sanctuary had been breached. Charles Wellington Harris announced, "You and your associates are under arrest for human trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder." Wellington's mask of civility cracked. "Do you have any idea who we are? What we can do?" "We know exactly who you are," Ethan stepped forward, holding Helen's notebook. Every crime, every child, every cover-up. Helen Miller documented it all. The evidence was overwhelming. Live audio of their meeting, combined with Helen's records and Reed's documentation, created an airtight case. Even their most expensive lawyers couldn't explain away their own recorded confessions. But Lucy's testimony, delivered via video to protect her safety, provided the human element that brought the evidence to life. Her clear, unwavering voice described the system from a child's perspective, the fear, the helplessness, the broken promises. "Miss Reed told us we were special," she testified, "that only special children were chosen, but being chosen meant disappearing." The board's carefully constructed world crumbled. Their phones went silent as frozen assets and seized computers cut them off from their power base. Years of untouchable status dissolved in hours of coordinated raids across multiple countries. Wellington, last to be led away, turned to Ethan. "Why couldn't you just stay blind?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "The system worked. Everyone benefited." "Ask Helen Miller if everyone benefited," Ethan replied. "Ask my wife Anna. Ask every child you treated like property." The evidence gathered in that conference room triggered investigations worldwide. Other facilities like Haven were exposed. Hidden accounts were frozen. Children were rescued and returned to their families. Reed, watching from her prison cell as the news broke, allowed herself a small smile. Thomas, she whispered, knowing her son would finally be safe from the board's influence. The arrests made international headlines. Global child trafficking ring exposed ran above pictures of the board members being led away in handcuffs. Their respectable facades crumbled as evidence of their crimes became public. Lucy watched the coverage with Ethan at Helen's rebuilt diner. "Is it really over?" she asked. "This part is," Ethan answered honestly. "Thanks to Helen's evidence and your courage." The diner's bell chimed as Harris entered, carrying more files. The work wasn't finished. There were still children to find, families to reunite, wounds to heal. But the board's reign of terror was over. Their power, built on secrets and fear, had been broken by the very things they'd dismissed: a waitress's careful notes, a child's perfect memory, and the determination of those they'd tried to destroy. Justice, so long delayed, had finally arrived. The reunion took place in Helen's rebuilt diner, now a symbol of hope and healing in Clearwater. Emily Richardson stood nervously by the counter, her butterfly locket catching the morning light. After years of searching, she was moments away from seeing her daughter. Lucy paused in the doorway, Ryan's hand tight in hers, Ethan's reassuring presence behind them. For a moment, mother and daughter simply stared at each other, bridging years of separation with silent recognition. Charlotte, Emily whispered, then corrected herself. "Lucy. You can stay, Lucy, if you want." Lucy moved forward slowly, touching the butterfly locket with trembling fingers. "I remember this. It played music when you opened it." Emily unclasped the necklace, and a gentle melody filled the air. Lucy's eyes filled with tears as forgotten memories surfaced: bedtime stories, butterfly kisses, a mother's unconditional love. "I never stopped looking," Emily said softly. "Even when they said I was crazy, that the fire had killed you. A mother knows." The hug, when it came, was fierce and healing, but Lucy didn't let go of Ryan's hand, pulling him into the embrace. "He's my brother," she said firmly. "Where I go, he goes." Emily knelt to Ryan's level. "Then I guess I have 2 children to love now." Ethan watched from the counter, his heart both full and aching. This was what Anna would have wanted: families reunited, children safe, love triumphing over darkness. Emily turned to him. "Thank you for protecting them when I couldn't, for giving Lucy back her ability to trust." They worked out an arrangement that honored all their bonds. Lucy and Ryan would live primarily with Emily but spend weekends with Ethan. The diner became their shared space, a place where their unconventional family could grow together. Other reunions followed. Reed's son Thomas, freed from the board's control, came to thank them. His reunion with his mother was complicated by years of separation and the choices she'd made, but it was a start at healing. Jessica Miller's case was finally solved, bringing Helen's family closure, if not the reunion they'd hoped for. Her sacrifice had helped save countless other children from similar fates. Lucy insisted on honoring Helen's memory by learning every recipe in the Blue Notebook. Each Saturday, she and Emily baked in the diner's kitchen, with Ryan as their enthusiastic taste tester. The chocolate pie became their specialty, made with Helen's secret ingredient, love. "I used to think family meant people who looked like you," Lucy told Ethan one evening as they all shared dinner at the diner. "But it's really about people who love you enough to fight for you." The diner became more than just a restaurant. Following Helen's example, they turned it into a safe haven for children in need. The back room, where Lucy and Ryan had once hidden, now held resources for families searching for missing children. Emily hung pictures on the walls: Lucy and Ryan at school events, family dinners, holiday celebrations. Among them was a photo of Helen, smiling warmly, and one of Anna and Lily Carter. All the pieces of their story, honored and remembered. "We're kind of a weird family," Ryan observed one day, looking at the photo wall. "The best kind," Lucy corrected, hugging her brother. "Because we chose each other?" The healing wasn't always easy. There were still nightmares, moments of fear, trust issues to work through. But they faced them together, supporting each other through the hard days and celebrating the good ones. In the end, they created something beautiful from their shared pain, a family bound not by blood but by love, understanding, and the courage to keep fighting for what matters most. 1 year after the board's fall, Helen's Diner hosted a special celebration. The sign above the door now read Helen's Haven. And inside, the walls were covered with new photographs, smiling children reunited with their families, newspaper clippings of justice served, and memories of their own healing journey. Emily Richardson, now heading a foundation for missing children, stood at the counter where Helen had once kept her careful watch. "We've located 15 more children this month," she announced, each one being brought home thanks to Helen's records. Lucy, now 12, moved confidently through the diner, helping serve the gathered families. She'd grown taller, stronger, the shadows in her eyes replaced by a determination to help others. Ryan followed her like always, proudly wearing an apron with Junior Chef embroidered on it. "We're opening 3 more safe houses," Harris reported, reviewing plans with Ethan. After the board's exposure, he'd been promoted to lead a new task force dedicated to preventing child trafficking, using Helen's model hiding in plain sight, providing sanctuary to those who need it. The diner had evolved into something extraordinary. During the day, it served comfort food and coffee like always, but after hours it became a command center for their ongoing mission. One wall held a map marking every facility they'd exposed, every child they'd helped rescue. Ethan watched Lucy teaching younger children Helen's chocolate pie recipe, her patience and gentleness a testament to her own healing. She still called him Dad on weekends, but now it was a choice made from love rather than fear. Victoria Reed's son Thomas had become an ally, using his inside knowledge to help dismantle remaining trafficking networks. His weekly visits to his mother in prison were part of their shared journey toward redemption. "Helen would be proud," Emily said softly, joining Ethan at his usual spot by the window. "We're not just solving past crimes, we're preventing future ones." The foundation they'd established in Helen's name provided resources for families searching for missing children. The Blue Notebook's recipes were published, with proceeds supporting safe houses across the country. Each copy included Helen's story, ensuring her sacrifice would never be forgotten. Lucy had started a support group for rescued children, creating a safe space where they could share their experiences and heal together. Sometimes she told them being strong means asking for help. "Helen taught me that." The diner's kitchen became a place of therapy through baking. Children who had survived trauma found healing in measuring ingredients, following recipes, creating something beautiful and sharing it with others. Every pie, cookie, and cake was served with a side of hope. Ryan, now 8, had discovered his own way to help. His drawings of butterflies inspired by Emily's locket became a symbol of their cause. "Because butterflies are free," he explained simply. Even in victory, they remained vigilant. New threats would always emerge, but now they had a network of their own, one built on love, trust, and the unwavering belief that every child deserved protection. "You know what Helen used to say," Lucy asked one evening as they closed the diner, "that sometimes the best way to honor those we've lost is to help those still here." The bell above the door chimed regularly, with new families seeking help, new children finding sanctuary, new stories of hope beginning. Each time Lucy would look up and smile, remembering her own first night of safety in this very space. As the sun set on another day at Helen's Haven, the mingled scents of coffee, fresh baked pie, and hope filled the air. They had transformed a story of loss into one of love, a tale of darkness into a beacon of light. The work would continue, but now they faced it together, a family forged in adversity, strengthened by love, and dedicated to ensuring that no child would ever face the darkness alone. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story of love, justice, and redemption. If you were moved by Lucy, Ethan, and Helen's journey, please take a moment to like and share this video. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that sheds light on important issues. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories that touch hearts and raise awareness. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story impacted you and what it made you think about family, courage, and hope. Help us spread this message by sharing with friends and family. Together we can make a difference and ensure stories like these reach those who need to hear them most. Your engagement supports our mission to tell stories that matter. Press that like button, hit subscribe, and join our community of storytellers and change makers.